by telephone. We're trying this technological advance. We'll see how it works. So she's kind of agreed to be our guinea pig in this thing. And I also noticed a past commissioner was here a little bit ago, Al Ward. Many of you know who Al is. I look forward to reading his articles. And he's still a very active sportsman in the community and in the state of Kansas. So, Al, we're glad to have you here. Let's roll on. Linda, we have a tourism briefing.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
This guy, he's no good.
Before I get into the tourism side of things, one of the things I wanted to do is just take a couple of minutes to talk about our state parks. We do have several of our state park managers and management team members here, and if they don't mind, I'd just like you to stand up just so that people can recognize who you are. These guys have worked diligently to create an atmosphere that is very conducive to visitation at our state parks. They've worked through thick and thin and done a great job. So I'd just like to take a minute to acknowledge them. So thank you guys. Also, I wanted to just, with respect to our state park folks that are here, they have worked really, really diligently throughout all of history, obviously, to create an environment that is welcoming to our state park customers. At the same time, what they always have tried to do is to look forward into the future as to what we can do to make a difference for our customers. How can we make the experience better? How can we make it easier? How can we make it much more of a positive experience? And one of the things that Linda's going to be up on the agenda here in a few minutes, but she's going to talk to you about a program, and I'm going to give you a flyer here, but it is called ORMS, the Online Reservation Management System, and if you wouldn't mind, Commissioner, handing those down. She'll visit with you more about that, but even though Mother Nature in her own right made last year absolutely miserable for us with everything that transpired from the floods to the heat to the blue-green algae and everything else, I can tell you that the fish are really biting, the water's coming up, and people are out there getting their camping permits and coming out to the state parks, and we're real excited about the way this season is starting off. The other thing that, beyond what Chris had indicated with respect to the park pass, we feel that if we can get it through, it's going to be a really good thing for all of our state park customers, not only now, the ones we have now, but maybe even those who have been intimidated by the system. For the most part, it's, when you come up to Memorial Day weekend and you come to the state park, El Dorado State Park, and you have a line that's 1.5 miles long to get into the state park, it's a little bit disconcerting. And so one of the things that this state park pass would do would basically make it a real easy pass, create an easy pass system for our customers so that we could create 2 lines of traffic. Those folks that have their state park pass could come straight on in, make it real simple for them. And so we really do hope that our state legislators, and for those that are listening, encourage them to consider getting this moved on through this year. Also, one of the things that I wanted to let you know that they've done, those that have never attended a state park open house, I really would like to encourage you to do so. This year, for the first time in a long time, we're actually conducting 2. One will be a statewide open house program for all of our state parks. That will take place this year on March the 31st. That is a Saturday. It also happens to be the last day that people have the opportunity to purchase their vehicle annual passes at a discounted rate. So if you haven't gotten out there and gotten your annual park pass yet this year, do it. March 31st will be a great time. We have activities going on at just about every single one of our state parks, and definitely having drawings for prizes. We partnered this year with the Kansas Lottery. They are providing a terrific package of prize opportunities for anybody that comes. If you have an opportunity, please do so. With respect to tourism, there's a lot going on in that arena as well. For those that didn't have the opportunity, in your commissioners, in your handout or in your book, right behind the first blue sheet, there is a summary of this year's second Governor's Flint Hills Summit. It is an economic summit that was driven by the governor. I said annual, but actually that's the second one this actual year with respect to efforts taking place in the Flint Hills. really rather than going through the entire 4 pages that you have there, really what the Flint Hills Summit is designed to do is to create synergies throughout the Flint Hills region so that the activities that occur within the Flint Hills region can really serve to help drive the state's current economic conditions. This summit brought together not only landowners, conservationists, trail developers, Kansas Livestock Association members, Farm Bureau members, business owners, tourism partners, and also our partners to the south, the Kaw and Osage Indian nations. The topics that were covered varied in a lot of different ways, but primarily it was focused on rural development, economic development in the Flint Hills region, invasive plant species in the Flint Hills. That's a real huge potential impact to our Flint Hills region. Probably the biggest well-known enemy, or maybe not well-known enough, is Threeridge lespedeza, and what can be done to help offset the threat of Threeridge lespedeza to the tallgrass prairie. We talked about ag marketing, we talked about ag tourism, we talked about conservation easements, and we talked about how important it is for us to work collaboratively together. And I think this kind of goes into what we've seen in the state parks and throughout our agency overall, to really come together. You know, we all have opinions. What we find is that if we can create a common synergy, that we may actually come up with better solutions than we could come up with individually. So the Flint Hills Summit was a wonderful opportunity to bring a group of people. I can tell you, they've been there. That group of people has been at the table together before, definitely hollering at each other, not in the friendliest of environments. And what we did is we found out that people, as long as we didn't put where they were from, it was amazing. They come up and talk to absolutely anybody. And so my name was Linda Craighead. It didn't say what I was affiliated with, what group I was associated with, where I was from, anything else. All you knew about me was my name was Linda, and or Frank, or other members of the audience that were there. So it was a great opportunity. It was a collective effort, and we're moving some things forward. One of the partners in this entire effort is an organization that actually the city of Manhattan that has built the Flint Hills Discovery Center. I don't know if anybody's heard about that. It's going to be in Manhattan. The grand opening is April 14th. I brought some invitations for the commissioners to attend along with me. There's also some located back in the back of the room. For those that don't know anything about the Flint Hills Discovery Center, it is designed to really showcase why our tallgrass prairie is so important, not only to our state, but also to our nation, and actually on an international scale. On this day, we'll have all sorts of things going on. There's the Kaw Nation will be there in full attire to dance and to honor their receipt of the dedication of the plaza, which actually has insignias of the Kaw Nation. And for those that didn't know, the Kaw Nation obviously is our namesake, the state of Kansas. They will be there. We'll have the governor or the lieutenant governor speaking as well that day. There'll be activities. It will be free entrance to absolutely anybody and everybody that wants to attend. There are activities for kids. There's going to be all sorts of really cool stuff going on. And to tell you a little bit, and I don't want to spoil the surprise, but when you go in and enter, it's really hard for people to understand, especially for those that might like other areas of the state better than the Flint Hills, but to understand the importance of the prairie fire to the maintenance of the tallgrass prairie ecosystem. So when you go into the amphitheater, you're treated with a wonderful 15-minute film that starts out with the spring burn. And with that spring burn, as you watch the film, there's smoke that actually rises. You have the heat that is generated from multicolored lights. It factors on through the year, the summertime, and the thunderstorms that occur. So as that thunderstorm occurs, you start to hear it from the distance, and you start to feel the wind as it starts to pick up because there's fans that are blowing on you. And it's a really, really unique experience at the end as they go into the winter season. That winter season obviously is shadowed with a wonderful, nice layer of snow. And you never know. You might even get snowed on if you go. So I do encourage you guys to attend. If you can't attend on the 14th, please make a point of going there at some time in the near future. The other thing from a tourism perspective that we're working on, and I'll put it up and back rather than showing everybody at this point in time, but we've been working diligently to identify what our strategic marketing theme is for this upcoming year. And even though we sometimes try to get away from the Land of Oz, it does have a little bit of a theme with respect to that. But I think what you'll see in the picture of the ad that I brought along, you'll be very pleased with. A couple other things I just wanted to mention along the way. We are also working very closely with the National Park Service and identifying a project that has been adopted by Secretary Salazar in the Department of Interior to work on a designation of the Kaw River as a national recreation trail. Our point person for that project is Roger Wolf, and he has done a tremendous job. I'm working together, local community partners, landowners, tourism partners to help with that initiative, and also to work through some of the questions that they have, because this is a brand new program and there is some questions and there is some concerns. We've sat down and visited with the Kansas Livestock Association as well as Farm Bureau, but we also see this as a wonderful opportunity for the state of Kansas to get recognition on a national basis. And just a couple other things I wanted to point out one more time. Again, March 31st is a statewide open house for all of our state parks, so please do plan to attend. April 13th and 14th, for those that are around the El Dorado area or statewide, is the Governor's One-Shot Turkey Hunt. For those that have an interest in that, please make sure you consider participating. On April 14th, again, is the grand opening for the Flint Hills Discovery Center. On June the 15th and 16th, we have a very important partner in what we do, and that partner is Wildscape. It is our nonprofit partner. They will be hosting the Governor's Fishing Classic in El Dorado State Park. So if you would please put that on your calendar and plan to participate, we'd really appreciate that as well. And also on June the 16th, which coincides with the Governor's Fishing Classic, is the first annual Governor's Flint Hills Freedom Ride, which happens to be a motorcycle ride for all those motorcycle enthusiasts that are out there. So there is a lot going on. I'd encourage you to log on to travelks.com for more activities that are going on around the state. And again, be sure to purchase that annual park pass at this point before March 31st. We'd greatly appreciate it and encourage your legislators to truly consider the legislation that's before them. So with that, I'll stand for questions. Yeah.
Now, this is through the Kansas Department of Wildlife Parks and Tourism. Have you considered, we camp, 5-6 weeks out of the year, and before we leave, we make all our registrations through this nationwide registration system for camps in all over the United States. Do we utilize that?
That's exactly what that is, sir.
Okay.
This is a nationwide online registration management system. So if you've never camped, and Linda will tell you more about this, but if you've never camped in the state of Kansas, but you have camped in Ohio, and you're in their system, then all of that's going to propagate the screen. It's really going to be a wonderful resource for our customer base, and it'll help us really market our program more effectively nationwide.
Good idea. Good.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, webless migratory birds. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. There's two items to address regarding webless migratory game birds. PowerPoint, please. Should be 2012 March Commission meeting. Correct. The first item addressed is in regards to shooting hours for sandhill cranes. There was a briefing item in your briefing book packet. Kansas is one of 9 states in the Central Flyway that has a sandhill crane season. And since its inaugural season in 1993, Kansas has remained more restrictive in many situations than what the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service frameworks allow. For example, our shooting hours. In most years, we lose 3 to 4 hours per day for each hunting day for sandhill cranes due to these restrictions. This proposal would change the current legal shooting hours for sandhill cranes from sunrise to sunset for the entire length of the season. The proposed regulation will reduce regulation complexity, improve hunter participation and satisfaction, while maintaining safeguards to prevent the accidental take of endangered whooping cranes. With that, I'll pause for any questions regarding shooting hours for sandhill cranes. Without any questions, I'll move to the next item. And this is regards to the legal take of mourning doves, or all doves in general. Again, a handout was provided in your briefing booklet. This proposal would require the take of doves while they're in flight, similar to what would be found method of take for other state game birds, such as pheasants and quail. The basis of this proposal would ensure safety and reduce any potential damage to property or loss of services. If there are any questions regarding to this?
Anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Mr.
You're
Chairman.
very efficient.
Moving on to the next item, early September waterfowl seasons, and we have one item to address, and that regards to September teal. And again, there was an item in your briefing booklet. September teal seasons are designed to provide harvest opportunities for teal that are normally pass through or migrate through Kansas prior to the general waterfowl seasons. Season lengths are based on breeding population estimates. However, they will not be available till June, at which time the Fish and Wildlife Service will set the frameworks at the June 21st Service Regulation Committee. However, based on last year's blueing teal population of over 9 million birds and spring habitat conditions in the prairie pothole region, which has good carryover from 2011 to 2012, again is expected to allow for a 16-day season. It is important to note, however, in developing season dates, that we might only be able to adopt 8 hunting days in the High Plains unit, that area west of 283. This is due to the 107-day hunting limitation for any one migratory game bird set by the Migratory Game Bird Treaty Act. The regulations for the High Plains duck season is 97 days, and when you add in the 2 allowed youth days, that brings up only 8 days available to reach that 107-day maximum. As we are still in the scoping process and gathering public comments regarding this, staff recommendations will not be available till the April Commission meeting. Thank you.
Tom, are you going to be the guy taking us through waterfowl the rest of the year?
That is unknown for at the moment, but currently I am.
Who knows? Anybody?
The position is open right now.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Tom, I have a question. You talk about carryover. How long does a teal live?
They're probably one of the shortest lived species, probably barely over a year and a half for something like a blue wing or green wing.
Don't get much of a carryover then, do you?
Not much of a carryover, but they have a pretty high breeding propensity, so it doesn't take many.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Commercial mussel harvest. Ed?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, this is a interesting topic and probably something you haven't thought about for the last 10 years because there's been a 10-year moratorium on commercial mussel harvest. Typically, Tom Mosier would be up here doing this. Tom retired last Friday, so I do thank Tom for much of this data. I also salute Tom for 38 years of service for our agency. I just hope he would have lasted one more week. Most freshwater mussels in Kansas are in southeast Kansas, and in the rivers, the Verdigris, Neosho, Spring, Meridocene. These rivers have gravel beds, unlike the shifting sand rivers of the western Kansas or in the Kaw or the Ark River. The watershed here is one of the best probably in the nation, and some of the best mussel beds in the nation are found in southeast Kansas. The watershed is the Flint Hills, and it is also the source of the gravel for these freshwater mussels. This is a shot of some of the mussels in the Verdigris River, and in that river we can find 23 species in an area about the size of this room. In Kansas we have about 40 species of mussels, so there's pretty good diversity, and these are long-lived species. Many live as long as humans, some even longer. Why was there commercial harvest? It was really recently, for one reason, it was for the cultured pearl industry. And in the 1990s, the Japanese were importing these for cultured pearl implants or nuclei for the pearls. A mussel would be cut up and into cubes, milled into spheres. Those would be implanted into the pearl oysters, usually off the Sea of Japan. That string of pearls there is probably by weight 90% mother of pearl from the southeast or even from Kansas. Pearls were once a symbol of wealth and status. Not so anymore. I bought that string of pearls for my wife for $35. Don't tell her I paid that little. She thinks I paid much more. Things have changed greatly in the last decade. The Chinese have come in big time into the market and have really pushed the Japanese out of the market. The economy has really changed. This, what you see opened up here, is a freshwater mussel in one of the inland China species. They have determined that they do not need the nuclei from our mother of pearl from the Midwest. They can simply take a piece of mantle tissue, implant it, and harvest sometimes up to 30 cultured pearls out of one freshwater mussel. They have been producing tons, literally tons each year of these cultured pearls, that has pushed the market way down, and the interest in buying our mussels has pretty much disappeared. But freshwater mussels have had a lot of history to them in the past. They've been used for buttons from about 1890 to 1940. By then, plastics came in vogue, luckily, because most of the beds were depleted. These mussels came from under a concrete porch that was removed in Oswego, Kansas. There was a button factories up and down, especially the Neosho River. The largest one I know of was at Iola. In 1918, they processed up to 30 ton in 1 week. That would be like 2 or 3 dump truck loads of shells, mostly out of southeast Kansas rivers. Even prior to that, there was an archaeological dig on the Verdigris River just in 2010. These old white shells, or we call relics, we can still identify what they were. The dig discovered a mussel cookout site. So if you're into archaeology, it was a late archaic, early ceramic period, dated from 2,200 years ago. You can certainly tell what species they still are. They hold up well underground. Over the time, our regulations on mussels have gotten more and more stringent, especially in 1992. We've limited it to just 4 native species. Monkey-faced maple leaf bluefur and Threeridge. We allowed only 4 rivers to be harvested. There were refuges established. Federal reservoirs were open. But in 2003, to now, we put on a 10-year moratorium. A moratorium simply means a suspension of an activity, in this case, commercial harvest. Here's a look at those players, the monkey face, the maple leaf, blue fir, and the Threeridge. And I'm going to concentrate on the Threeridge because that past harvest shows that harvest was not sustainable. Our regulations were not stringent enough to protect this species. From 1992 to 2002, there were a total of 1.2 million mussels removed from the rivers. Most of these mussels were probably less than a pound, 3/4 to a pound, so it represents well over 1 million mussels removed from the rivers. 82% of those were Threeridge. They have yet to rebound, as I'll show you soon. The other species, the harvest was not heavy enough to really impact them at all. Where did the Threeridge come from? Most from two rivers, the Verdigris and the Neosho rivers. Over 1 million pounds were sold and exported to the Japanese. Our rivers in southeast Kansas are highly exploitable. The best mussel beds are in the riffle areas, the shallows. Usually there's gravel bars nearby. When the water is low in the summertime, they're easily exploited. And even our refuges, we know, were often violated when the prices were high back in 1996. Another look at a good mussel area. Typically, there's bedrock nearby, and that stabilizes the area so mussels can survive for decades without being scoured out by floods. A little bit of data on those Threeridge mussels. As you can see, in the Verdigris River, we had data from 1982 where that species made up 32%. By 2010, they have not rebounded. They were down to 2% of all the mussels in the river. Neosho River, the same thing. But if you look at the Meridocene, where there wasn't any harvest, they make up about 43% of the mussels in the Meridocene. Looking at the density, oftentimes when we sample mussels, we use a square meter quadrat, randomly place that, dig out so many of those to get an idea of what's there. That has really dropped also in the Verdigris River to a significant portion, significantly down on that species. Have we done a lot of survey work? Yes, we have looked at and measured in the last 10 years over 35,000 mussels. Some of that has been done by our personnel, some through a state wildlife grant where colleges and grad students were hired to go out and look at these beds. These species are native. They've been around for millennia, but they do have a complex life cycle. They are unlike animals like maybe a raccoon or a rabbit, where you could remove 40% of them in 1 year, and the next year you may not even know the population's rebounded right back where it was. Mussels need exacting conditions to reproduce. There's a male and a female. The female releases glaucidia. Those glaucidia must attach to a fish host, and those fish, once they attach to the fish host, they stay there for up to 3-4 weeks. They drop off, and hopefully they drop off in the right gravel habitat to continue into the juvenile stage. Now, the females have come up with elaborate mechanisms to attract fish. They, so to speak, go fishing. Some use lures, some flash bright gill ends. Some produce worm-like structures that are laced with these glaucidia. Some produce little Trojan horses that look like insect larvae with fake eyes and body segmentation. And inside the glaucidia are living, and once the fish bites it, it may burst. Those will then insist on the fish's gills to drop off at a later date. What do the mussels get out of this? This is really the only means for them to disperse upriver into areas that may have been dried out due to a drought or whatever. The maple leaf has only one fish host, and that is the flathead catfish. The bluefer, we know, has one fish host. That is the freshwater drum. Now, you may think, well, that's probably what happened to the Threeridge. The fish host disappeared. Not so. The Threeridge has several fish hosts that are suitable for it. So that was not really a reason why it significantly declined. Some of the diversity in Kansas, and these are very interesting names: sand shells, muckets, butterflies, washboards, paper shells, pigtoes, fan shells, warty backs, kidney shells, spikes, elk toes, sand shells, ellipses. We have a great diversity, and all use different fish hosts, have different ecology. In fact, in the United States, the freshwater mussels are considered one of the most imperiled aquatic groups. There are 297 species in the U.S. 72% of those are imperiled. We have 40 species in Kansas. 4 are on our endangered list. The feds are looking at listing 2 of those species as federally endangered. We're not nearly in as bad a shape as the rest of the U.S. as far as the health of our mussel assemblage, which is good news. And part of that is due to pretty good water conditions in our Kansas rivers, in the watershed, which is mostly grass, which, like I mentioned, the Flint Hills. Freshwater mussels do provide ecosystem services to us. They're much more than just rocks laying in the bottom of a riverbed. They're filter feeders, and they remove and consume bacteria, algae, and organic matter from the water column. There's been tests. One large mussel during the summer can siphon and filter 8 gallons of water per day. There are beds in the Verdigris River that I estimate there are 80 to 150,000 mussels, not much longer than a football field. So they can have significant impact on some, and bacteria is one of our concerns in our waters. They are a prey item, mammals. Raccoons, otters, muskrats, turtles. Common map turtle specifically eats mussels. Fish, freshwater drum, also eats mussels. When they're small and semi-translucent, anything that will get a hold of them will eat them. They are pollution sensitive, so they're excellent indicators. They are especially sensitive to ammonia spikes, heavy metals like lead, zinc, cadmium, copper, and some pesticides. And even their physical structure in the river has been proven to be a benefit. They will help, when there's a good bed of them, they help stabilize the substrate. They also provide hiding, even the empty dead shells provide hiding places for small catfish and insect larvae. There's a couple of aquaria that one has some freshwater mussels in it and one does not, and after 24 hours they cleared that water and clarified it. What we look for when we're out doing mussel surveys is to make sure there's reproduction going on. They do not reproduce every year very well. Usually when there's low water flow in the spring, they have good years, and that does not happen very often. Last good year for mussels in southeast Kansas was 2003. And that's not uncommon. Looking at some in the Meredith scene, one mussel we looked at was called the butterfly, and we found several, but they're only from 2 age groups. One was 7 years old and one was 18, and that's all we could find. We have also developed the technology, at least some universities have worked on this, especially Missouri State University, of propagating mussels to reintroduce into areas. We're looking at reintroducing this species called the Neosho mucket into the Cottonwood River, where it was once the most common mussel, but due to high ammonia spikes from 1960s feedlot pollution, they disappeared. We think now that the water quality is good enough to bring them back. These are not commercial mussel harvesters. There's simply a couple boys connecting with the river, and the last value of mussels is the educational value. And you can talk a lot about how they connect with fish, how they are indicators of environmental quality, and it goes on. With that, I end this presentation and will take any questions.
When you say commercially harvested, are they with mechanically or by hand?
All the commercial harvesting that went on in Kansas was by hand. In the Mississippi River, they use brails where they drag across the bottom of the river and pick them up with these hooks.
When was the last time there was a harvest in Kansas?
The last big harvest was 1995-96, and that was a spike in the exports. The demand went up and the price went up. In fact, the best price came from maple leaf out of the Fall River Reservoir, was $4.40 a pound. A 5-gallon bucket would weigh over 50 pounds.
So they haven't harvested them since then because of the pricing or because we've regulated them?
Both. We've regulated out and the demand has disappeared. We're recommending that the moratorium go on for another 10 years. I also offer other options in there for the commission to consider. I'll talk more about those at the workshop.
Is the people that harvest these, are these Kansas companies, or are these people that come from across the country?
We had Kansas residents and non-residents in here harvesting mussels.
What do you charge for a permit to harvest mussels?
The non-residents were charged $1,000 per year to harvest, and I think the residents were $75.
The access to this, because it's a river, is there any other permitting that happens because it's a river?
No.
No.
Usually hopefully they would get permission from the landowners. That was one of the problems.
What does hopefully mean?
Well, as we know, the rivers are private land. Some of these, especially, we had problems with trespass in the past.
Are the zebra mussels a long-distance cousin of these guys, or what?
The zebra mussels do not have a fish host intermediate, so they can directly reproduce at great numbers. Usually zebra mussels need something else to move them around, and zebra mussels are, as we know, an exotic invasive species, and they're the wild card here. We don't know what their effect on the river mussels will be yet. It's probably not going to be good.
Thank you.
Is there any hope, Ed, that well, it's not usually the case, but the native mussels might, because of their size, be able to provide some sort of a backstop for the zebra mussels in these streams?
It looks like the zebra mussels are more of a problem in reservoirs and streams. They don't like the flowing water where the best mussel beds are. But they haven't gotten in some of our better rivers yet, so our future surveys will probably let us know that answer. But they do attach directly to native mussels and will actually outcompete them.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Any questions from the audience? I don't personally think we have any interest in allowing any more harvest at this point. We'll deal with this, like you say, at a workshop session. Very good. Ed did mention that biologist Tom Mosier had retired, and that's somebody who has been a pretty good resource for me over the years in answering a lot of questions, some of which were kind of odd. And I also take this time to point out, I think he holds the record for netting the largest mud puppy in Kansas or something like that. And in fact, I think the mud puppy is somewhere over at Lawrence. I thought as a nice gesture, we should consider maybe giving him his mud puppy and a jar of formaldehyde as a going away gift. Apparently that fell on deaf ears. So he will be missed. Jim Pittman, prairie chicken seasons. My glasses are short. When I put them on, I was kind of looking above.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to be discussing some potential recommendations we're going to have for prairie chicken seasons, but I first want to talk a little bit about prairie chicken biology and status in our state. We do have two species of prairie chickens that occupy Kansas, the greater prairie chicken and the lesser prairie chicken. Generally, the greater prairie chicken occupies the eastern part of the state and north central and northwestern Kansas. Lesser prairie chicken occupies west central and southwestern Kansas. If you look at Figure 1 in your briefing book materials, you can see where those ranges occur. There is a substantial area in west central Kansas where the two species overlap, and as recently as 15 years ago, we didn't know of the existence of lesser prairie chickens in that part of the state, and there were very few greater prairie chickens. They've expanded greatly up into that part of Kansas north of the Ark River due to CRP enrollments over the last 15 years or so. Currently, if you look at Figure 2 in your briefing book materials, I've interpolated chicken density across the state regardless of species. And those data are based off the 48 survey routes that we run annually across Kansas. We survey roughly 800 square miles each spring for prairie chickens, so it's a fairly large sample and fairly good distribution of the data. And in looking at that map, you can see that by far the highest densities now occur in the Smoky Hills and the shortgrass CRP mix of west central Kansas. Additionally, those populations have increased greatly, as I mentioned earlier, over the last 15 or 20 years in north central and west central Kansas due to CRP and also some favorable weather up until this past year. Currently, the lesser prairie chicken is a candidate species for federal listing. It's listed as status 2, which is one step away from threatened status. The Fish and Wildlife Service is working on a proposed rule right now, which will come out this fall for the lesser prairie chicken. However, in Kansas, our populations, as I've just discussed, have fared much better than elsewhere in the range. Since lesser chickens were first petitioned for listing back in the mid-1990s, we've seen a steady increase in Kansas north of the Ark River. So we're not facing the same perils and population declines as they are elsewhere in their range. Additionally, we know the reasons for decline where it is occurring south of the Ark River are due to poor recruitment of young, due to poor nest success and chick survival. And we know that in those declining populations of lessers and even greaters in the eastern part of the state, that harvest accounts for a very small proportion of mortality. Currently, we regulate harvest of chickens in 3 hunt units, which you can see on Figure 4 of the briefing book materials. And we have some of the most restrictive units in the restrictive regulations in the state in those northwestern and west central populations where our chicken numbers are the most robust right now. We monitor harvest of chickens across the state through a postseason mail survey of our small game hunters. And right now, if anyone who holds a small game license or a lifetime license can hunt chickens without any other sort of verification. And this is problematic for tracking harvest because 3% and 1% of our small game hunters hunt greater and lesser prairie chickens respectively. So when you survey only a proportion of the small game hunters, you get a very small number of responses from people who hunt prairie chickens, making it very difficult for us to estimate harvest and precision. And having the more accurate and precise data is becoming more and more important, especially as we approach a potential listing of the lesser prairie chicken. So the department is considering a couple of different recommendations for prairie chicken seasons throughout the state. One is that we're considering increasing the bag limit and potentially changing the unit boundaries in western Kansas to provide more opportunity in those populations that have the greatest density at the current time. Secondly, we're considering recommending a mandatory registration for prairie chicken hunters, and we're discussing two ways to go about that. One of which would be requiring a Coles privilege in our automated licensing system that people would be asked to purchase when they bought their small game license. If we went that route, it would cost a minimum of $2.50 per hunter because of the processing fee. The other thing that we're considering is having a free online registration outside of Coles, where people would have to go on their own after they've purchased their license to get a verification number. Either way, we would require that a hunter have that verification number in possession before they harvested a chicken. So today we're looking for a little guidance from the commission and from the public about exactly how to increase opportunity in western Kansas and which of those two routes for mandatory registration might be the best approach. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions or have some discussion.
Mr. Chairman, Jim, this is a species that I've hunted since about 1980, actually the greater prairie chicken. And the populations back then were great. It wasn't uncommon to see a dozen or more flocks of 50 to 100. I'm sure many of our hunters have experienced that used to hunt them. And now you rarely see more than a half a dozen birds, especially in the area where I'm from, the southern Flint Hill region. The decline in the population, is that primarily because of intensive grazing and burning in the area, or?
It's due to, I hate to single out intensive burning, it's due to inadequate fire frequency. We have people that burn annually, which is really bad for chickens, we're finding out through some of our research. But then we also have people who don't burn at all, and that's even worse.
Okay.
So there's very little of that intermediate burning.
Is there communication from our department to large ranchers down there do we communicate with them on proper burning or best practices? Or?
We sure do, and we have a pretty good feel for what's going on, but we haven't had the definitive data that we've needed up to this point to influence ag policy and conservation policy. For that reason, we just started a research project in Chase and Greenwood counties this past spring to look at how intensive burning and double stocking of livestock affects demographic rates of prairie chickens versus an alternative management strategy, which is patch burn grazing. And that 1 year of data indicates that the patch burn grazing, which provides a lot more residual cover for nesting, does lead to much higher nest success and much higher chick recruitment. So after a couple more years of those data, my hope is that we'll be able to influence some conservation policy. And I have a lot of those folks tied into our research project right now, so they're well aware of what's going on.
The chickens that are in the northern part of the state, up in the Smokies, are they hunted, are they walked up, or are we used to hunt around feed fields. There was very little walking. How are they generally hunted up there?
Generally, there's not a whole lot of tradition for chicken hunting out there because it is relatively new in a lot of those parts of the state, as I mentioned. The people that do hunt, I think the majority are walking them up. It's hard to say that without a better way to survey those folks, which is the other part of our recommendation.
Okay.
So we can get at some of that information.
All right, thank you.
Jim, part of the problem is, well, we have what we believe to know is the best practice for burning. It's just not always considered the most economically efficient for grazing and for ranching purposes. And unfortunately, there is an unenlightened perspective that the state's lack of response to declining numbers by having the season open so long is a contributory reason why we don't have prairie chickens. That is generally considered by most biologists to be untrue, that nesting conditions far outweigh any hunting pressure that may take place. So I think we have to continue to educate, but best practice for prairie chickens sometimes runs counter to best practice for agricultural burning, and the patch burning doesn't seem to gain a lot of acceptance. I have another question on, nothing is easier than Kohl's, but every time you have a free service at Kohl's, it costs the consumer $2 or $2.50 or something. I think from the public's perspective, they have a hard time believing that it's revenue neutral to us when they paid $2.50 and had another page of green folded up in their billfold. How would be, is it just as effective for us if we did something outside the Kohl's system?
It would certainly be free to the consumers, and it would get us that pool of people that are hunting chickens, which would allow for better surveys. But the thing that worries me about going outside of Kohl's is that you lose some of the convenience of the person being able to buy that privilege right there when they're getting their license. And one thing I don't want to do, or that we don't want to do, is eliminate that opportunistic harvest that takes place on chickens right now. A lot of folks, of course, while they're hunting pheasants or quail, and they get the opportunity to kill a chicken, now they do it. And I worry that if we make them go somewhere outside of Kohl's, they may not get that verification that they would need to do that.
Well,
so it's a catch-22.
That's a good point. Enhancing opportunity is part of our mandate, and so if we have a population that would withstand more harvest, I think we should do it, because somewhat similar to the teal and other things, upland game doesn't have a particularly long life cycle, so we might as well harvest, and it's not going to have any effect. I just hate to add another fee, even though we don't get anything, but that may be the most effective way to do it. Are there any other questions?
Well, the only thing that I can see here, and Gerald, I think I agree with you, with the exception, well, with no exceptions, I guess. The other problem I see is you're going to require another stamp, another green piece of paper, like Gerald said, to put in your billfold. If you don't do it right at the vendor when they buy that license, and you can tell them you can go online. Well, there's going to be a lot of people that really just don't pay attention, and so it could be an enforcement issue, and people could get caught up in it accidentally. And so
problems with both approach. And I've talked with Karen about if we go outside of Kohl's, we can put a line on their license that indicates that they need a prairie chicken number. So at least when they print their license, they may notice that what is this prairie chicken number, and then we can inform them. But still, neither one's perfect.
I'll bet a lot of the people in the audience and a lot of the chicken hunters and other hunters are about like me. When I go and buy my licenses, I get a stream about that big, and I sign them and fold them up and put them in my deal, and there they are.
Right.
You know, and I understand what you're saying as far as being able to track it, and it's very important. I think for the minimal fee of $2.50, rather than the guy getting a ticket for something else or the potential of getting a ticket, my suggestion would be being able to get it right when you get your license.
Okay. One thing I didn't mention too either, it might be helpful for the discussion, is that there's going to be a great need to have these data if we want to continue hunting, especially for lesser prairie chickens. So we want data just not for our own benefit. It's to continue to justify what we're doing with the Fish and Wildlife Service. So
all that makes sense.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that was clear because I didn't state that earlier.
I had a couple questions, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Jim, do we know how many chicken hunters we have now?
Yeah, we have somewhere around 10,000 greater prairie chicken hunters, and we have 500 to 800 lesser prairie chickens hunters, but there's a lot of variability in those estimates because we get such a small number of responses from the small game harvest survey. So it could be within 2,000 or 3,000 or more of each of those numbers.
Those go to every upland hunter that's licensed?
We pull a percentage of the small game license holders, and only 3% of those folks hunt greater chickens and only 1% hunt lesser chickens. So it's hard to get enough responses to develop an accurate and precise harvest estimate.
Is there anything we could tie to that to make sure that they turn that survey back in?
That's a question for Chris.
similar, there is a statutory requirement to turn in your deer harvest survey. I don't know that people have been prosecuted for it. So it's a matter of whether you're willing to prosecute somebody. I mean, that's one alternative, is to make it unlawful to not turn back in that survey. I don't know that that's something that we should consider, just because I think that the ramifications of something like that. You could prohibit potentially people from getting a license the next year until they've turned in their survey. That would be an administrative burden on our staff, but that's one alternative. On the other hand, it's not going to catch people who have a lifetime license who don't turn it back in. So I'm not sure that there's a real good mechanism to do it, and one of those two alternatives just off the cuff.
Jim, or Chris, can you increase the size of the sample to offset the non-compliant samplees?
I'm not sure that if we surveyed everyone, we would get enough responses, because typically you only get 30% of the people who you survey respond, no matter how many times you harass them.
That's a good point, and when we're dealing with chickens, we want to be able to have as much as we can, because we're going to hopefully be able to use some of that material to prevent a listing down the road. I think most people, particularly if we had a little pamphlet that could be available, produced by print up about 1 million of them and put them at every licensed vendor, or at least every one of our offices, why we're doing this about chickens, our prairie chickens. I think that you will probably have a pretty reasonable compliance rate and not a lot of complaining, because a lot of the people who have long since given up prairie chicken hunting is probably because they don't have them in their area, and it's not going to be that much of an issue.
Right.
Is there any way to combine a HIP stamp / prairie chicken stamp?
The HIP is for federal species, and this is a resident species, so it's two different agencies.
So the HIP is regulated by the Fed, it goes to the feds?
Right, it's Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay. So much for that thought.
Good idea, though.
Well, I think we should go ahead and pursue both of these recommendations, and I think they'll be well received, and we may have to rely on more of a staff recommendation as to whether we go outside the coal system or not.
We can certainly have those discussions, and we'll bring something back to you.
Are there any other questions? Michael?
Yeah, I've got several, sorry. How is the sandhill cranes permits and stuff set up? Is that inside Coles, or does people just go online and do it? Those of us that remember to do it.
I believe that's separate, but I haven't bought one, so do you want to?
Permit itself is in Coles, and then the sandhill crane test is on our website. So it's printed separately.
We pay. I was just trying to remember. We pay through Coles.
You pay $5.50 for a Coles permit, I think is what it is, or $5 and plus a fee. And then if you do the sandhill crane test, which you have to have prior to purchasing the stamp, then that's online in our system free.
Okay. You say you want to increase opportunity, but you want to make it harder for people to be able to legally shoot a prairie chicken. That's like saying we're from the government, we're here to help. I mean, even though it's only, a couple bucks, I pay it, Chris will pay, 10 times that to hunt lessers. But a lot of people say, well, I probably won't do that. And then they get an invitation to go, or they find a field where they're flying over. I'm finding guys pass shooting them in Gove and Logan County now where they weren't, 5 years ago. Won't you be limiting? I mean, I understand you have to have the data. And Secretary Hayden, when he was here, suggested something like this for the lessers.
We've been talking about it for quite a while.
But aren't you going to limit the number of people that are, decrease the number of hunters that way?
If we had our druthers, we'd offer it free through Coles, but we can't do that.
Can't do that, right?
So we're stuck. We either have to charge $250 or require people to go outside. Neither one is it's free versus convenient, and I'm not sure which of those has the most value.
Now, will you be doing that for statewide or just the western areas?
Statewide.
Okay.
Because we use these, not only are we going to use these data to justify harvest of lessers with the service, but they also help us estimate distribution of these species, and that information feeds right into our conservation programs. And as Randy mentioned earlier, our chicken populations in the southern Flint Hills are the most imperiled in the state. So we also need data down there to help us target the conservation programs to benefit the species.
Is there something that the hunters that participate this and can, give you part of a bird to tell if it's a lesser or a greater when you're out in that fringe area?
That's one of the things we talked about doing. Once we establish a list of chicken hunters, we might be able to send those folks an envelope prior to the season, and where they can send back a wing or a feather, and we can do some DNA testing that way. So yes, that is a possibility, and that's another thing we've considered.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chairman, Jim, the $2 or the fee that's on the coal system now, is that because of a technical glitch that we have to do that?
Is Karen in the audience anywhere? Or Cindy, can you talk about this?
It's the dollar that goes to the vendor and the $1.50 you pay for coals.
So,
What the $2.50
yeah, I understand that. I understand what Coles is.
No, it's a contractual base that we have, a contractual agreement that we have with the vendor with the licensed vendor, the Coles operator, where they get $1.50 per transaction. So we're locked into that transaction, and then the individual license agent gets to keep $1, and that's statutory as well.
And the application of the fee, it would be spread across how many hunters? Just whoever would do upland game, or
probably
prairie chicken only?
It'd be prairie chicken only.
Okay, so $2 times 10,000 hunters. Okay.
Yeah, it's not a revenue.
Would there
obviously we're not getting any money out of it. So.
Could we get the data and the information? I know Robin doesn't want me to say this, but could we find the $20,000 somewhere else rather than the greater prairie chicken populations, I think, are imperiled, and I think this is very important. Would there be a way of getting the money from some other pool rather than directly from the
problem with that is that it's not that we want the money. It's the fact that the people who provide the online licensing system, so that we make sure that somebody from another state doesn't have past due child support or stuff like this. We have a contract with the provider that they charge a fee per transaction, and then Walmart says we want to have $1 or we won't sell them. And so we don't get any money for this. All we get is just a data bank from which we can send surveys. We don't make any money on it. It's revenue neutral.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman. I think Mike's point is well taken, though, is we're wanting to do the right thing, but does this create a barrier? Does it raise the bar another $2.50 fee? All I was thinking about was, let's go ahead and pay the vendor for whatever contractual obligation we have, but pay him in another venue somehow. Perhaps we pay it out of some other fund or other areas.
I think, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I think there's a real risk there of, if you offer it for free, but it's debiting us for $2.50, and we have 100,000 upland bird hunters, and they decide, hey, I'm going to get this just in case.
Well, I thought we were talking 10,000 hunters.
That's what Jim thinks is the number.
Well, that's $20,000. So.
Right.
Anyway, we don't have to beat that horse. I just thought I would bring it up. Maybe there is no solution to that.
Jim, let me ask you this question. Do we have anything else currently in the system, any kind of licensing avenue that we're currently using that we could attach this to that would accomplish the same thing you're wanting to accomplish? Does the state waterfowl stamp, is there federal involved in the state stamp as well?
I'm not sure about that either. Waterfowls, do you know any? That's what I thought. I saw somebody shaking
could
their
we
head,
do a state waterfowl / prairie chicken stamp and accomplish the same thing you want to accomplish? Because then we lose a vendor fee.
But the only problem
Let's
with
put
that.
a picture of a chicken and a wood duck, and it'll be good.
The only problem with that is the whole goal of the privilege is to narrow down the pool of people that we know are hunting chickens, so I can get better survey data. If we lump them in with another constituent group, then I may be in the same situation I am right now.
But what I'm saying is, maybe it's the first step in accomplishing what you want to accomplish, because you're going to narrow it down. Yeah, you're going to include waterfowl hunters, but I don't know how many waterfowl hunters, how many state stamps do we sell? That's something you may look
I'll have to
into.
research that. I don't know.
Because if you've got 10,000 chicken hunters and you sell 20,000 state stamps, I'm just going to use a number, and you overlap there partially, and you send out the survey, you're going to catch all the chicken hunters for sure, because they're going to have to buy the stamp. So you accomplish what you accomplish. You're going to catch some waterfowl guys too that don't care. They're going to send it in and say, I didn't hunt chickens.
That's something we'll certainly discuss. I haven't thought about that idea.
Because then you're not going to have that $2.50 vendor fee. Robin's not going to have to rub his head anymore about finding $25,000. and we resolve the problem, and you get your data.
We sure get the message here, and we can take all this under advisement when we come back on and twist and turn this around and see how we might be able to do it.
I think I understand what everybody is saying. I think everybody is saying that the two recommendations we support in general, and the issue is whether or not we want to have a fee associated with an enhanced opportunity. Yes, sir.
Is there any way that this can be attached to the HIP stamp that we're already paying for?
No, the HIP stamp, that's a federal.
Well, I understand that, but whenever I go to buy another one, at the office, they ask me, did you shoot 0 or 30 doves or 60? Can't prairie chickens be put on there so that office can then send that information into you? I mean, it's just some prairie chickens did you hunt? How many did you shoot?
Somehow I suspect that information goes direct and unanalyzed direct to the feds, and we don't have any procedure to be able to analyze that document. And that's just an unfunded federal mandate that we have. And staff, you figure that out. Yeah. Thank you, though. I mean, that's a good point. Any other comments? Doug?
Doug Phelps from Manhattan. My take on this, if you market it as a convenience fee, you're going to get a lot of resistance, because there's a lot of resistance to convenience fees on everything else. Would it be misrepresentation to market it as a prairie chicken research fee or something? I think you might be able to sell it to the chicken hunters if they don't think you're just being gouged for $200 or $250, but that they're paying into something that's going to help, manage the population and hopefully improve their hunting. So I don't know whether that's unethical or not, but it is legislative season, so that's just my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Doug. Well, we'll see what we can do on that.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just make sure I didn't hear any opposition from the commission. Because we have to develop regulations on any sort of expansion or increase in harvest in the West, where our chicken and one method or the other of a identification.
Does anybody have any concerns about expanding the bag limits if it's biologically considered sound?
No, I don't. No, I'm in favor of it.
Okay.
Very good direction. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, are you up again? No.
Not
Linda?
yet, I don't think.
Huh?
Not yet, I don't think.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission and the visiting public. I think a year ago I was up here talking about the Outdoor Recreation Management System, and maybe a time before that. So today I'm here to say April 17th we go live. What does that mean to us and our constituent group? What it does for us is we currently have cabin reservations online system now, but what we've done is expanded it to our campsites. And so a customer can make a reservation for a campsite and their utilities online 2 days before they come. Its Outdoor Recreation Management System is hosted by Reserve America. It will be launched through the reserveamerica.com and our ksoutdoors.com. So you can go to either one of those sites. Reserveamerica.com is the national system, so you can get every state that has that system, or you can put in Kansas and it will bring up to our portal. What it does for us is it provides customer service. We've been talking about data here today several times, actually. Kansas State Parks does not have the opportunity to collect data today. We have it on our annual camp holders, our 14-day holders, and our vehicle annual users. But we don't know how many times they visit our parks. We don't know the frequency they come or how many times they come. And so hopefully this system will allow us to do that. 50% of our sites will be in the system. So the rest of them are still walk-in. We've launched some email blasts here recently, and the feeling is mixed. I think there's some concern of how can I get my same old site. A lot of them will come in several days in advance, but once the system gets going, our constituent groups will see how quickly they can get on and make a reservation. What it does for us besides that is provides emergency response, and more importantly, it gets our money out of the field. And that, to me, is a significant issue. So that money will be collected online through an online source, credit card. They'll pay for their site and the reservation in advance, and then they will we'll have it collected, and we don't have to collect it when they come. Let me just tell you a little bit about the ORMS platform. It is through the company of Active Works Outdoors. They are a web-based, single, central database solution. Their first client was New York State Parks back in 2004. Since then, 34 state, federal, and county and private campgrounds use ActiveWorks as their platform. They have modules in camping reservations, registration, ticketing, permitting, and point-of-sale transactions. So we are excited. It's been a lot of work. If you go through a state park today, you're going to see the sites are marked that are to be reserved. And when you make a reservation, our staff will reserve that site for you when you come in. You'll check in and then go onto your site. Is there any questions?
How far ahead can they reserve? You probably told us that, I forgot.
You have to reserve at least 2 days in advance.
I mean, how far?
And then we go a year. We go right, and we only take reservations April 1 through the end of September, because that's our busiest time. The rest of it will be walk-in traffic only.
And from the data that we'll be able to collect, what do you hope to mine from that for future?
Oh my goodness, we've never collected anything before, so it will be interesting to see how we collect. The first thing that's most important is our annual camp users and our vehicle users, to find out, track them a little bit and see how much they are using our park and what the annual camp actually is worth. So that's probably our biggest use, our utility users. We haven't been able to collect that, so we'll be able to put a price to some of this that we haven't been able to do before.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Linda? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the otter biologist. That's right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. So I handed this item out to each of you on the table, and then I also put some of these in the back. The item wasn't in the briefing book, but I'll be giving you an update of the river otter harvest season. So the department initiated our first harvest season in modern times this previous fall. the handout is broken down in 3 sections there. The background section is sort of a review of the regulations that existed. Then the results are what happened this season, and then the discussion is where we're headed in the future. So the background information, the season began on November 16th, which is our fur bear harvest season opener, and it was to run concurrent with beaver, which ended March 31st or until a 100 otter quota was met. There was a 2 otter per trapper bag limit, and trappers were required to contact the department within 24 hours of harvest, and then we collected the carcass within 4 days of harvest and tagged the pelt at that time. Of course, otters are CITES pelt tagged in the same way that bobcats are. So, and trappers were able to get updates on the status towards the 100 otter quota by calling in an 800 number, so it was their responsibility basically to know where we were at relative to that quota. So moving into the results section, our initial records indicated that we reached the 100 otter quota on February 2nd of this year, and the 3-day grace period, which ended February 5, and trappers were able to keep otters that were obtained during that 3-day grace period. That was a time period basically to allow them to realize that the 100 otter quota had been met. Between February 2 and February 5, an additional 13 otters were harvested, and then we, as we pulled back in the tagging records, we realized that 8 otters in addition to the 100 had been collected. We also had some various road kills throughout the season that we didn't count towards the quota, and we've had 4 otters harvested since the season closed. So our season total harvest now is up to 131 otters. And if you look on the back of that sheet, you can see the location where these otters came from. Most of them are from southeast Kansas. We have a lot of counties where we've documented otters in past years, but where they weren't harvested from this year. A couple that jump out at me are Chase County, where our original reintroduction back in the early 80s occurred. No otters were harvested this season from that county. Lyon County, Osage County with Osage with the Meridazine River, Woodson County with the, various city lakes and stuff there, otters have been verified in. So otters didn't show up in a lot of places where we know otters are. If you look at Figure 2, you'll see that anywhere from 0 up to 7 otters were harvested during each day of the season. There was a little bit of a surge in harvest at the end of the season. I know there were people that were calling into that 800 number and were planning on trapping otters, but were monitoring to see where we were relative to the quota so they could decide when they were going to go out there and try to get their otters. And in fact, the last 5 days of season was the largest take of any 5-day period during the open season. If you look down at the tables, otters were primarily taken in body gripping traps and secondarily in foothold traps. Those are the 2 main traps of choice. And the target species, it's a little over half of the otters, 63 otters were taken by people that were targeting otters, but it's interesting that nearly that many otters were taken by people that were targeting other species. So most likely those otters that were taken while other species were being targeted would have been harvested this season anyway. So basically the net effect of having an otter season this year was an additional 63 otters were harvested that would not have been otherwise taken. So we're still working on processing the carcasses that we have obtained. We're taking lower canine teeth off of them, and that's how we obtain the age. We send them off to a lab, and they age them by counting cementum annuli rings. We've also collected female reproductive tracts, and once we get them all collected, we'll spend a couple days going through them and looking at reproductive output. And we also collected stomachs, and their contents will be analyzed. We're also, sort of might be of interest, Sternberg Museum, when they found out about that otter from Washington County, which was the first otter we've documented there, they requested the specimen of that otter, and so we're going to be providing the museum with specimens from from otters taken at various locations throughout the state, so we'll be working with them on some of this as well. We would expect to have age information by this coming October, and at that time we'll reevaluate the status and regulations of river otter, and of course the time period to make changes for the next season has passed, so the regulations will remain the same for the upcoming season and the 2012-13 season, and then we will make recommendations for the 2013-2014 season after we have the results of this current harvest season. So with that, I would answer any questions, if there are any.
Any questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, let's see, Matt, so prior to this, it was illegal to take otter, is that correct?
Yes, to take them intentionally.
Okay.
We did not, for otters that were taken incidentally, the department collected or confiscated those otters, but it wasn't deemed illegal as long as they weren't intentionally trying to capture an otter.
Okay. And it's the trapper, it's just fur value like the other,
right?
The beaver and everything else.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Or trophy status in the case of otters to some degree here also.
Any other questions? I have a couple. Do you know what an otter pelt was selling for this year?
Well, there was a NAFA auction at the end of February, and they averaged about $100 at it. But that's from all over the country. Prior to that auction, the year before, they averaged about 40, I think. So the market came up on them rapidly, like it did a lot of other species this year.
Okay, and can I assume, based on these statistics, that probably most otters are the target method is with a conibear or body gripping trap?
Most of them, but there are quite a few of them that were incidentally taken.
Well, I understand, but if you were going to intentionally catch an otter, probably the preferred method would be with a body gripping trap.
Oh, not necessarily. I mean, there's a fair number of people that intentionally target them with foothold traps. When we've trapped them for research, foothold traps work just fine, and they're perfectly functional either around latrine sites. You can even catch them on dry land around latrine sites, or they can also be taken in pocket sets intentionally, just like you would take a raccoon.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, falconry regulations.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I've brought this to you several times in the past. We've been diligently working with our staff and working trying to get regulations finalized so that we can send them to the Attorney General's office and get these regulations passed. We're somewhat closer to a deadline that we have of basically our drop dead date is September 1st of 2013 to get these regulations voted on and to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for their final review and approval process so that they can be implemented by January 1st of 2014. To date, we have nationally about half of the states that have already completed their revision of the falconry regulations. So we're starting to be a little concerned that we need to push on so we don't get caught in any last-minute rushes or anything like that. Actually, tonight or this afternoon, some members of the Kansas Hawking Club have come to the meeting, And actually, we've asked Tim Kimball, one of the officers of the Kansas Hawking Club, and actually Tim was very instrumental back in 1991 when we first implemented falconry, and working with the department very closely and getting all the regulations originally set up and everything. And I'd like to ask Tim to come up and give a short presentation on falconry in Kansas and nationally. Tim is recognized nationally as one of the leading experts on falconry in the country. So, Tim?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mike. Mr. Chairman, and commissioners, and staff members of Kansas Wildlife Parks and Tourism, I appreciate the opportunity to give this presentation to you. I'm going to make it pretty quick. I've passed around a several-page handout that has the details in it, so I didn't have to stand up here and express those verbally to you. But I want to impress upon you the importance of this sport of falconry to us, and the sport, or the importance of the sport to the national and international and global community of outdoorsmen and sportsmen. What's the button I push here? There we go. So what I'd like to do first, very quickly, is define falconry. It's strictly a hunting sport. The art and pursuit, or the art of pursuing wild game in its natural state with a trained bird of prey. It's a very interesting type of an activity because what it represents is a cooperative relationship between a human, a bird, and often a dog. So it's like a three-way team. It's a master-servant relationship, except unlike most human-animal relationships, the animal is the master. The falconer is a servant and provides everything to the falcon or the hawk in order to serve its interests, and so the falconer is actually the servant in this case. And it is the most highly regulated field sport in the United States. It's controlled by federal and state laws and national and international treaties. Some folks that you may recognize the names of have made some notable quotes. Otto Leopold, father of modern game management, said that falconry is a perfect hobby. I think most falconers would perhaps disagree a little bit that it's something more than just a hobby. But what Otto Leopold was saying was it's an activity that uses a wild animal to hunt wild game with the human as a partner in that process. And so it's a very pure form of hunting. Roger Torrey Peterson, the founder of the Peterson Field Guide series, said that falconry is the ultimate form of bird watching. This is because we do it mostly to watch the birds up close and to see everything that happens in nature, where you usually have to see it from afar if seeing it at all on a daily basis. It's more the individual flight and not catching something that's important. And Frederick II of Hohenstaufen, who wrote a book in 1248, one of the first published books in scientific literature, is credited with publishing that Art of Falconry, which was the first ornithological textbook. College textbooks on ornithology cite that book as a landmark publication, a treatise on scientific study of birds. Falconers devote considerable time, energy, and attention to managing one or just perhaps a few falcons or raptors in tip-top shape. And it's kind of like maintaining an Olympic athlete. You need to keep the individual in fit condition to best perform. And that's the way falconers keep their birds, is in healthy a condition as possible and feather perfect. So we devote a lot of time, and it's probably a little bit different than zookeeping or perhaps rehabilitation in some ways, because we're dealing with an individual bird that's our hunting partner, and not just with a bird that we're trying to get back into the wild, but something that we're hunting with. This is my home. Well, it's actually the home of my falcon. This is to give you an example of some of the facilities that we are required to have. Now, there's details that are incorporated here that may not be part of the federal and state regulations, but this is the mews. This is the place where the raptor spends most of its life. It affords the raptor with a safe living quarter. And inside, such as the inside of this mews that you saw a bit ago from the outside, is the chamber where the bird lives. It's well drained, well ventilated, protected from the wind and sun and the rain, and provides excellent protection for the bird. Just a little bit about the history. We're dealing with a sport here that's 4,000 years old in the steppes of Central Asia, in an area not unlike central Kansas, when in the mid and high grass prairies of the high plains, in Mongolia and Turkmenistan and Afghanistan. Those countries are the place where falconry originated over 4,000 years ago. Then it spread to the Middle East and then to Northern Africa and into Europe. Then it reached its heyday in the Middle Ages in Europe. In the feudal system, different individuals in society, depending upon their social rank, were entitled to fly different kinds of birds, with the largest, fastest, and most powerful birds being relegated to the emperors and kings and the princes. Native Americans didn't, although they revered raptors, they didn't practice the sport, and thought this is because the migration across the Bering Land Bridge came well before falconry was invented 4,000 years ago. And then the Bering Sea rose and the bridge disappeared, and so there was, at that point, a lack of movement of humans across the Bering Land Bridge. And it had to wait until the European settlers came to the Americas to introduce it to the New World. And that was only about 70 years ago or so, basically. It is a regulated activity in North America, and it's regulated mostly because of some federal and international laws and treaties. The Migratory Bird Treaty, which was signed in 1916 between the United States and Great Britain, and then implemented with the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in 1918, initially did not include raptors as protected species. But in 1972, an amendment to that treaty included raptors also. And prior to that time, raptors generally were considered vermin, with bounties being offered as late as up into the mid-1960s in many states. 1973, the Endangered Species Act, with listing of species such as the peregrine falcon and bald eagle as raptors on that. And because of those types of legislation and treaties, the federal government had to develop a permitting system that allowed for the protection of the resource, and that initiated with 1976 issuance of permits, federal, joint, and state permits, with permit requirements including testing, reporting, various types of reporting, inspections, and an apprenticeship period. In that time, in the 2 or 3 decades that followed, virtually all states except Hawaii became falconry states, and Kansas became a falconry state in 1990. And then since the 1970s, as falconry had been studied by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and by some states, and did environmental assessments, it was determined that basically falconry had no impact on wild raptor populations or on game populations. If anything, we had a positive impact because of our involvement with research, conservation, endangered species recovery, and outreach type of activities. And so, as a result of the findings of no impact, the federal guidelines recently were revised in 2008. They were published, and that was largely a deregulation. It was a lightening up of the regulations somewhat because falconry was shown not to have any impact on the wild resource. UNESCO, which is with United Nations Education, Scientific, Cultural Organization, just a year and a half ago, recognized falconry as an intangible cultural heritage because it spans the centuries and the millennia, and it spans also the continents. And as you look around at the falconry world, in Europe, Middle East, the Far East, Asia, what you see is individuals practicing the same sport, but in different cultures. And so it's got a very long intertwined history with different cultures in humanity, which is a significant achievement for falconry to be recognized there. Excuse me. Well, what's the value to Kansans? Kansas is a premier falconry state. We don't have a lot of falconers here, but it's a very, very ideal state for a number of reasons. We're in a mid-latitude, and so we don't have a climate that's too cold or too hot, and so it's a very suitable climate for practicing falconry. Low human densities means that there's lots of open space and natural lands to hunt on. We have a history of excellent falconry regulations and a very falconer-friendly state agency with the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks and Tourism. Good access to public and private lands to hunt, and abundant game populations with small game and waterfowl in particular. So it's a very, very good state and a very popular state for falconers to come to from out of state to hunt. Hunt hares like jackrabbits, prairie chickens. It's the only state in the country where you can legally hunt 2 species of prairie chicken, the greater and lesser. And many falconers come from out of state to hunt these 2 species. Falconry organizations have their field meets, which are opportunities for falconers to get together and experience the hunt in the field together, have evening programs that are educational and whatnot. Kansas Hawking Club holds several meets a year, sometimes together with the Oklahoma Falconers Association. Some other organizations hold regular meets like American Falconry Conservancy, the International Eagle Ostringer Association, and the biggest organization of all in North America, at least, and one of the largest in the world, is the North American Falconers Association. It's held 5 meets here in the last 21 years. Liberal, 1 year after falconry was first liberalized or legalized here in Kansas, there was a national meet in Liberal. 314 falconers attended. A few years later, Dodge City, with 283 falconers and nearly 400 registrants. 97, Dodge City again, with about 250 falconers and nearly 400 registrants. 2004, and then finally 2010, Western Kansas again. These are week-long meets, typically a 5 or 6 day meet. Now, I don't know if I have the best information in terms of estimating the economic impact of this kind of an influx from out of state mostly, but with doing some simple mathematics to try to estimate just the motel, the food, the out-of-state license, and gasoline costs, I came up with a typical meet like in 1997 in Dodge City, with the number of attendants there being on the order of about $180,000. And it actually might be more than that because I didn't include all of what they might be spending money on. So that's the gross cash flow that might result from a meet, just a single meet here. So what's the future of falconry in Kansas? Well, we'd like to hope that it is secure, and we feel that it will be secure. But we do need to pass the regulations. It's dependent upon quality falconry regulations that benefit the sport and protect the resource. We have a limited window of opportunity, as Mike mentioned, in order to revise and implement reasonable and acceptable regulations by January of 2014. We think we can do it, and we've had some assurance from staff with the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism that will occur. We stand ready to assist in a number of ways with the final revision of the draft regulations and revision of the falconry exam, training, education of wildlife conservation officers. And here's some of our wishes and suggestions. First of all, maintain an open dialogue to continue to improve the draft regulations. Meet and discuss periodically throughout the remainder of this process so that we can ensure that the process is on schedule and the transition occurs on time. And if the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism is interested in tracking the economic impact of non-resident falconers coming into Kansas, we have another suggestion for the non-resident hunting license application. And that would be a yes or no box. Are you a licensed falconer? And that might help provide a little bit better picture in terms of those individuals that come not necessarily to attend a meet, but maybe come on their own time just to hunt prairie chickens, jackrabbits, or maybe to try to trap a prairie falcon. So with that, I'm going to bring this to a close, and I appreciate your time. I know that we're probably into the break time, so thank you very much for your indulgence, and if you have any questions, my email address also is included at the end of the printed document that you received.
Thank you. Okay, Mike.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, we'd sure stand for any questions.
Anybody have any questions for either of these two gentlemen?
I would like a copy that handed out. I'd like to get a copy of what's handed out.
I've got a copy of the printed copy. Were there enough to go around? Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. We're going to go on here for a little bit. Even though it's a little after 5, I want to get several of these things done if we could. Brad?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm here to present about 4 or 5 public lands regulation recommendations. As you're aware, the public land section manages over 335,000 acres of land and water for hunting and angling opportunities. Even though that's a small percentage of the total land base in Kansas, those 300,000 acres receive several hundred thousands of user days. So when you have a limited land base, a large high use impact, obviously you're going to have some conflicts, some fairness, opportunity issues, where everybody's trying to get advantage have taken advantage of those limited opportunities. So we bring forth several recommendations that we want you to consider for regulation to maintain that fairness and opportunity on our public lands. Most of our regulations in public lands fall under the KAR 115-8 series, for public use, public resources, managing KDW property and infrastructure. We've identified a couple equipment issues that we want to continue moving forward with, and that is tree stands and portable ground blinds. The use of tree stands, and I'll just address tree stands. Tree stands is the tree stand issue is that we are seeing on several areas a large inundation of people setting up multiple. I even had reports of this year of one guy setting up 50 tree stands on a single wildlife area. What that does is it indicates that area is being heavily used, and even though our regulation allows people to hunt out of any tree stand that's available, most hunters like to take great satisfaction in scouting an area and putting up their own tree stand and hunting out of that. They don't want to climb up in somebody else's tree stand and sit there wondering if that hunter is going to show up, not knowing that he's got 1 or 50 tree stands out. So we're recommending that we limit the number of tree stands to 2 per person on all department managed lands, and those tree stands be marked either with the name and address of the owner and the KDWP team number when they're on department managed lands. By doing this, though, we still do not want to give the impression that is their stand. We still want to maintain that regulation that does not allow exclusive use. Portable ground blinds is another issue that has surfaced over the last several years, in that it's difficult to see somebody in a ground blind and knowing whether that ground blind is occupied or not. People are tending to leave those ground blinds out for a long period of time, not knowing that anybody's in there, so somebody else might go to another place. So we are recommending that ground blinds cannot be left unattended overnight. I think in the regulation or in your briefing book it says left unattended and shall be removed at the end of each day. We're just recommending that they be removed at the end of each day. In addition, they will also be marked with the user's name, address, or KDWP number, T number. A similar issue is the use of waterfowl decoys, people leaving out waterfowl decoys in order to mark their spot or to reserve their area. That is becoming an issue on several of our waterfowl areas. And again, we're recommending those decoys be removed at the end of each day. The other one, issue that is not an equipment issue. It can be an ethical, biological, ecological, sociological issue. It's been debated on many fronts, and that is the use of bait on areas to primarily attract wildlife for hunting purposes. I need to make it clear that this is not just a CWD issue. I received a few calls last time that, if it's just CWD, why are you making it statewide? And it's not just a CWD issue. It is a disease issue. It can be a habitat issue, and several other issues, like I mentioned, that could be contributed to baiting. Currently, Kansas is the only state in the Midwest that allows unrestricted baiting. Texas also restricts it, and Oklahoma is also considering restricting baiting on public lands. So we are proposing that no person shall deposit, expose, distribute scattered bait while hunting or preparing to hunt on department lands. And bait is considered to be grain, fruit, vegetables, nuts, hay, salt, sorghum, feed, or other mineral or food that is capable of attracting wildlife. This does not include liquid scents or sprays that are commonly used. Another issue, well, probably not an issue, but something that we want to get a grasp on is the amount of guiding and outfitting that are occurring on public lands. We know it's occurring, but we really don't have a firm grasp on what is going on with guiding and outfitting on public lands. So we're requesting that we have a free permit that will be issued to all guides and outfitters that want to guide on public lands. And this will, enable us to gather information that we don't currently have. And I guess the last one is we were asked by the commission at the last commission meeting to consider a 200-yard minimum distance requirement between waterfowl hunters. And at this point in time, we are not bringing forth any recommendations. Primarily, it could be a enforcement, limits hunting opportunities. It's going to be difficult in the dark to tell if you're 200 yards from another group. And it would limit some hunting opportunities on some of our smaller wetland areas that are relatively small, and based off the vegetation and topography, you can actually hunt within 200 yards of another hunter and not have a tremendous impact on their success. Just one more item. I talked about the use of non-toxic shot last time for dove hunting. We are still considering that, but I'm going to bring that forth to you in January of next year. That will be in effect for the September 2013 season. So that's something to look forward to next year. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions from the commission?
Sure. Brad, on the non-toxic shot, that'll only be on public lands?
Yes.
Okay.
Brad, I appreciate you considering the distance on the setting up on the waterfowl spreads. And I appreciate the comments of it's an enforcement issue, but I'm looking at it from a safety issue, so I'd like for you to reconsider that.
Okay.
Second of all, I'm going to make this point again on the guiding and the outfitting. I understand what we're trying to accomplish as a department, and I'm in agreement with that. I also believe that if you're a guide or an outfitter, you're doing it for a revenue stream. If you're guiding deer, if you're guiding jackrabbits, whatever you're guiding, you're probably doing it on land you have leased or land you have owned, so you're doing it with an investment. If you're going to do it on public land, you ought to pay a fee. It's just that simple. Probably something that we shouldn't consider right now, but we should consider in the future, because we're taking a resource that we're all using and letting a small group of people profit from it. And if they're going to profit from it, they should produce a revenue stream for the rest of the people that use it. And that's my opinion.
Any other comments from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, Brad, on the guiding and the outfitting, we don't need to beat this to death, but there is no fee for a guider or an outfitter now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or
Chris? Sure, I'll address that. There's a legal issue associated with charging a fee for which there's not authorization in statute. And we're authorized to charge a fee for items at their cost, but if you don't know what guides cost you and how do you determine the cost, so without some sort of specific statutory authorization, we can't charge it right now. So there is a legal issue, and if it's a concern, we can go back to the legislature at some point and request a change in the statute for a fee to charge. There are many of us here who were once in the guide business, as in we regulated guides back from 1990 to 2005, and the legislature took that authority away. So I think the proposal that the department has right now, first off, meets the legal standard, but also you have to realize that there's also a political element associated with it. And so I guess my advice would be to tread lightly as we move forward in this area, not to go until we have some sort of data and know what the impacts are.
But we're in front of the legislature so often, and they're regulating what we're going to do anyway. One more issue probably wouldn't hurt.
I understand, probably in my heart agree. Let's see what the statistics show as to whether or not we're having a lot of these guides using public lands before we go forward. And then we'll have a better idea. We'll be armed with more ammunition if we decide that it's an unfair practice to the rest of the hunting public.
do we have an estimate of the number of organizations or people that are guiders or outfitters for commercial profit in Kansas? Does anybody have an estimate?
No, not now.
The last time that I knew, we had, when we regulated guides, we had about 470 or so.
How did you regulate? What did that?
We had a permitting system that was required in order to engage in commercial guiding.
Okay.
And then, just because I'm familiar with the history of the statutes and the regs, I think in 1990 when it first started, there were about 17 or 18 that first year, and then it ramped up from there. But there was an exemption for landowners on their own property, and the statutes at first were rather weak. The department requested the legislature change the statutes and strengthen it, and then you started to see a dismantling of the statutes by the legislature, and then ultimately the revocation of our authority to regulate commercial guides just as an activity.
Okay.
There are several philosophical debates you could have whether or not the individual who's hunting on the piece of property of ours is actually paying for that resource by purchasing the hunting license and permits. or whether or not philosophically we should even regulate guides, and obviously the legislature took that away. Clearly in this instance, I think we have some authority to regulate our own property, and I think this is just kind of a step to see what's out there. I don't know that there's been a proliferation of guides since 2005, but without some sort of mechanism to regulate or to require a permit, we don't have any idea what's out there.
If we had to draw an assumption, there might be 400 plus or minus in the state right now.
Right.
Okay.
But I would, when it comes to our public lands, I would anticipate that if they're, just based on our experience before, my experience before, if you're going to be a successful guide, well, let's put it this way: if you're going to hunt waterfowl, clearly you're going to be using a public area, and I think that's probably the number one place that we would see guides or have an idea of. You're going to hunt the bottoms or you're going to lease some ground around there or something like that, or around our big marshes.
I'm not suggesting we rush forward and try to conquer something here, but I think Commissioner Budd's, I think he's thrown out an idea that, if somebody does have commercial interests in it, for us to look at it, to regulate it, and I understand all the reasons why it was taken away. I understand that. We have a wonderful resource that people are deriving income off of, and for us not to have some type of involvement in that, it seems counterintuitive to all the other regulations that we have all kinds of regulations for everything, mussels, but we don't regulate guiding and outfitting. So I think long term it could be a revenue stream for the department, but I understand the difficulties you've laid out, so I'll stop right there. We could discuss this all night, I think.
Any other questions, comments from the commission? Any from the public? Mike?
Yeah, Brad. Obviously, this does not include WEHA property then.
Correct.
On the blinds and baits. You only said about 300,000 acres.
Yeah,
Okay.
the 300,000 just are public lands that we own or manage.
Okay, and I'll state that I was around covering these meetings when they passed the first guide regulations, and I watched the legislature systematically rip it apart. So, what Chris is telling you is the way it happened. And I've got a question for Commissioner Budd. Let's say I'm hunting Cheyenne bottoms. I'm not a world-class trap shooter like you are. I do not shoot things perfect every time. I hit a mallard drake and he sails off and goes down 199 yards from the next group over. I cannot go get that bird under what you're...
That's not what I'm proposing at all. I'm talking about setting up your decoy spread. I'm not talking about if you shoot that bird, that has nothing to do with it.
Okay, but what if... Okay, it's...
Yeah, you're wanting to go after something you shot. I'm not trying to regulate that.
It's where you set your decoys.
Or your boat or whatever you're going to set.
Where you set your boat. What if you park your boat, we've done it before 200 yards when we put our decoys.
You're not going to shoot many ducks. How far did you say? 200
yards.
Oh, yeah, you're not going to shoot many ducks. I'm not too worried about you.
I'm glad I suck at it.
Tim?
Tim Don, just familiar with the Quality Deer Management Association. I just had a few questions. I know I talked last time briefly. Again, it's 2 stands per wildlife area, right?
Correct.
And the other thing is I stated before, I was an archer hunter, so the issue I had was being able to set enough stands to deal with wind directions, which is fine if you're going to limit the stands. I said before, we can work around that and use more of a portable type tree stand. One of the things I wanted to question you on the tree stand setups, is that when you say not allowing a tree stand, are you including tree steps or any of those types of devices? Are those allowed to be in the tree where you walk in, you leave the tree steps in, you walk in, you set your stand? that morning to go hunting or that afternoon? Are you including the tree steps, and are you also including, there's devices out there where we have straps with hooks where we can go ahead and hang that stand real quick and slip it over the hook so it's ready to go. So I just wanted to clarify several of those issues there.
The tree stand regulation, and I don't have it with me, it has a specific section in there on steps, screw-in steps, and like that. This regulation would only deal with the tree stand itself.
So you'd still be able to leave your steps in, is what you're saying? Okay. The other thing I wanted to bring up was you said something about removing blinds every day.
At the end of each day.
At the end of each day. I'm questioning if you're going to require a guy to remove his blind every day, why wouldn't you require a tree stand hunter to remove his tree stand every day? In order, because I'm just looking at it as a fairness situation.
And we did consider that. That is a consideration. I think from a safety standpoint, it could be a safety standpoint in putting that tree stand up and taking it down every day. And that was, and I know some national wildlife refuges require that. We didn't feel like we wanted to go that direction, so not putting it up and taking it down every day. We thought allowing 2 tree stands to be up there, moved around the wildlife area at will, is a more acceptable method.
Okay. With the tree step issue, I still see it as you're staking out your territory if that's the issue there. If that's why we're limiting tree stands, is not to stake out territory. You still have that, what I consider as marking your territory, or however you guys have taken a position on that. If you leave those in, you're still marking that territory as being used by somebody. So I don't really distinguish that you're making a big difference on that part. So I'm just bringing that up to you. The other thing is on the baiting, fully agree not to allow any baiting. Outdoor Life has recently criticized us as an organization not being tough enough on baiting for hunting purposes, and so we appreciate you not allowing baiting on public lands if that's what you wish to do. But we would also encourage you to look at future expansion of starting to limiting baiting due to the disease factor and ethical hunting purposes. So thank you.
Any other comments from the public? From the commission? Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
It's 5:30. My preference would be to break, come back at 7 o'clock with the remaining items in the workshop, and then go into the public hearing. Does anybody have any objections to that, with the exception of maybe Matt and Jim, who might want to go home? Is that going to work out for you guys?
I don't care.
I'm not sure. Any other commissioners have any thoughts?
I agree with you. Let's move. Let's adjourn.
Do we have a dinner here anywhere?
No, I don't. I think.
Just wanted to invite the museum has invited everybody to come back when they come back from break and they get here early on a free tour of the museum.
Okay, and I don't think we have a dinner. I think everybody's on their own. Let's go ahead and adjourn, and then we'll come back at 7.